selling a company for a guy once, and he sold his earlier company to a well-known technology publisher. And when we were trying to sell his second company, and the big publishers at the time, Ziff Davis and CMP, and there were a couple others, weren't interested. But we had another buyer who was like a no-name company. He wouldn't sell it to them because they were a no-name company.
Really?
He was worried about his legacy.
Well,
it was not worth it to him.
This has been woven through this conversation, but that's another personality thing.
Right. Right.
That is like when ego gets in the way. And I see people like bite down on their ego like so much. You're going, wait, stop. You see what's happening right here. And of course, pride comes with an equal dose of blindness. So mostly they can't see what they're actually doing there. But what people are willing to trade off for ego is fascinating. I mean, you've probably seen people give up tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars due to their ego.
Yeah, I'll give you another story. I mean, I'm giving you a lot of the bad stories. There are a lot of good stories,
by the way,
too. But you can learn lessons through the bad stories.
You can, absolutely.
I mean, I wish we'd given this owner a personality test before we were selling his company. This is a guy who had 5 companies, and one of them was public. So every time I met with the guy, every 5 minutes he was looking at the stock price of the public company, and it was going up, and he was feeling like he's he's
the man.
He's the man. And we were selling a company, and his 2 daughters were running it. And so it's a nice company. We had offers for, I think the first offer was like $120 million. We wanted to move forward. And the buyer was private equity. So the buyer comes down to meet with him, and all of a sudden he introduces 4 or 5 new things that any buyer would say, I'm walking away. He introduced, now I want you to buy the building. Media companies, you don't buy the real estate. I want you to buy the building. And then he gave him 4 other things. And the guy just said, I can't do those. So he had to walk away. We brought in another buyer, and I brought him in because he said, I'll do all 5 of those, but I'll pay less for the company. I'll pay $110 million, not $120. But I'll take the real estate.
Take them. Yeah.
I'll do it.
Yeah.
And then the guy put up more roadblocks, and I finally realized, it was psychological. He was selling his daughters to somebody else, and he could no longer control them. He controlled his daughters, who ran the business, and told them what to do, to the point where one of them even lived on his property. And he absolutely had control over the daughters. One daughter's husband worked for him in another business. He was in control of their lives.
And he couldn't let go of it.
He would not let go, even though it would have been such a great opportunity for the daughters. They would have been running a company that was, could have really grown. And they were good operators and everything. And they were crestfallen when we couldn't. They were hoping to get out from under his rules and stuff.
Interesting you said that. So one of the things that I like to help people recognize is this very idea of like personality, what stands out, what doesn't. And an interview question that I ask people, and I want to come back to this idea of this person planting these seeds because I have a similar story. So tell me an example of when you've sacrificed for something lately.
Good question.
You would think so.
Yeah.
And it is. It's a great question. I love to ask it. It's very insightful. It does well. But Stephen knows. We posted that on social media. It ended up being a short that we put out there. Oh my gosh. I think it was like 350,000 views on Twitter, like almost overnight or something like that. And very similar, I think, on Instagram and whatnot. And the comments were 60% negative.
Really?
What a horrible question. And they usually were followed up with things like, I would never sacrifice anything for a company. Here's the man who just wants this. And what a red flag if he's asking you to sacrifice and this and that. Well, by the way, those people do not have any idea that they just made my point.
Right.
Like, I would never hire you.
Right.
And I know that would come out somehow.
Right.
Because for you to believe that you're ever going to do anything worth value in any organization without providing sacrifice is nuts. Yeah. And by the way, the person who's asking the question, if they're worth their own salt, is going to sacrifice for you too.
Right.
Like, that's a part of it. But that entrepreneur, founding entrepreneur to that sale, that's where you see that life-changing moment for them so often. Have you seen that gone wrong? Like, you follow up with somebody. The reason I'm asking this is because, so I have Let me just lay the foundation for
Okay.
this, and I would
Okay.
love to hear maybe your history on this, having gone through it.
Maybe you better lay the foundation.
Yeah, the
'cause
foundation.
I would say I haven't really seen things go wrong afterwards.
Well, this is the interesting point about it.
But maybe if you point something out, it'll refresh my memory.
Yeah, so there's 3 points.
Okay.
The first point is that there's all the stories of people that win the lottery.
Right.
They're
They're the ones that
dead or dead broke.
Yeah.
So many years later.
And
Then there's people who sell their business. And I always tell people, listen, if your maturity grows at the same pace or beyond your wealth, you're going to be fine. But if you have this fast wealth, even if like you do a startup business and you're 18 years old and you sell it for an enormous amount of money and you're immature, that can also go bad.
True.
But most people that build a business have to mature to build the business.
Yeah.
So they have
And it takes a long time.
It does.
20 years. I mean, it's not unusual at all.
No. So they're becoming more virtuous.
Yeah.
So by the time that money is there, they can manage it. So that usually I see, totally different thing. The fast money lottery winner takes a life of destruction. The other one generally does pretty good. But there's a third group. And it's the person who sells the business not knowing where they're going. And I've actually, I've counseled a few guys on this.
Yeah.
Guy sells his business. He's got $40 million. He worked as hard as he possibly could for like 9 years to get it there. In grave fear because he was making no money. I mean, he didn't even really make that much money before he sold it because he was just scrapping. Mm-hmm. So every time he's flying to London to meet with this person, he's wondering about the $6,000 that he had to spend on the trip in order to get back. And his wife is wondering, are they going to be able to pay the bills? And I need a new dress for the party. Like he's in that entrepreneurial mode. And then boom, $40 million. Everyone's happy for him because he's a great guy.
Yeah.
But now there's a void.
Oh, yeah.
And this is a real psychological thing that men and women, but men I think more because of their solitary nature, right?
Yeah.
They aren't quite as, social. They go into this deep despair. And that I always tell people, listen, if you're ready to sell your company, you got to know where you're running to, not from. But anyway, what's your experience just in the light of all 3 of those scenarios?
Yeah, we don't see a lot of people selling and then going into despair the way you've described, or even blowing all their money and stuff. What we do see a lot from founders is they sold their company, they stay in touch with employees, they know what the new owner's doing. They call me up and say the new owner is screwing up the company. Okay. I get that.
Yeah.
And they're really, and sometimes
they're living in the past.
Sometimes they're right. Sometimes the new owner is screwing up the company, but other times the owner's just making changes because they've got to make changes.
Yeah.
But that's the owner that just can't let go. Like I think if you sell something, you have to let go. And you have to, especially if you're no longer involved, you have to be able to walk away and say, good luck. And if I can help, call me, but, I'm not going to interfere. It's like when there's a transition in CEOs. Well, the former CEO, if they're spending too much time looking over the shoulder of the new CEO, it's not going to be good, right?
Yeah.
You've got to give that CEO the freedom to kind of do things their way. They can't just do things your way. They have to do things the way they want to operate, and you have to give them that freedom. And sometimes they might be making a mistake. You see it, but you know what? They have to kind of live through it to learn. Yeah, I have an interesting story along those lines. I was selling a company, and I'd been on their board for 4 years. And it was a small town in New Hampshire where the business was based. And they probably employed 150 people. So we went to market. We had the company sold to a buyer, and we're already in due diligence. And the buyer said something that they really kind of threw a wrench into the deal. They said, well, we're going to change your healthcare policy. We're not going to have this benevolent policy that the former owners had. We're really going to make you kind of have your own health insurance. So it was the employees were really going to get kind of screwed there, right? So the owner did something that I think was very admirable, even though we didn't get the deal done that time. We did get it done later. He said to me, I live in this town. When I go to the grocery store, I can't look former employees in the eye and tell them that I did a deal that was good for me but not for them. And so he didn't sell. And then we sold the company a couple of years later to a buyer that protected the healthcare policy for a couple of years before making any changes. And he just wanted to be, he said, look, I could sell and move out of town and go somewhere else, and but I would be ashamed, if I left the employees with something less than optimal. Well, one of the things that always fascinated me is I mentioned earlier that I worked with Warren Buffett's daughter, Susie Buffett, early in my career.
And by the way, you own
Berkshire Hathaway stock now.
Stock,
I do.
okay. And did you?
Back then, it was only $3,000.
But you didn't buy it at $3,000.
I didn't. I thought $3,000 was like an outrageous amount for a stock.
But what's it worth now?
And now it's worth $775,000.
Sounds like a pretty good deal, man. That was 40 years ago.
I missed out. That's one of my big misses in life. In terms of investments. But what always fascinated me was. He's a value investor, and when he buys companies, he's a value buyer.
Yeah.
So,
and do you know Warren? Have you met him?
I met him. Yeah, and really impressive. I met him once. I corresponded with him, trying to invite him to speak at something once. A very gracious guy, so what people don't realize is a lot of people want to sell to Warren Buffett. And if you do sell to Warren Buffett, your company, you're going to be selling at a discount because he never pays a premium.
No, he is a discount buyer. He's an undervalued
so that's
guy.
how he buys. And so I'm always amazed when someone says, oh, I sold my company to Warren Buffett. I mean, that's great. And he's a good guy and everything. But, you sold it for maybe 20% less, than what you could have gotten.
Than you would have.
Because he's just not going to overpay.
I remember.
And people just don't. So that's an example of a trophy kind of buyer who you can tell everybody you sold to him, and most people 9 times out of 10 they're going to think that's amazing. I'm maybe one of the few guys who is going to say, oh, you surely could have gotten more money.
Right. You're expecting, hey, I sold my business to Warren Buffett, and you're expecting somebody to say, wow, that's cool, and you're like, oh, I'm sorry.